All right, well, welcome to another episode of Digging Deeper, another first-timer. Last week we had Pastor Mike, and this week I'm joined with Pastor Anthony.
Oh.
You want to go by Pastor Anthony?
Yeah, spice
Anthony
it up
Hall,
all the way.
new youth pastor here at Rise City Church.
Yep.
Excited to have you here. And yesterday was Vision Sunday, and for the most part, it was a major emphasis on the next generation. And excited to have you share today just talking about the next generation, specifically middle school and high school.
Yeah.
But hey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Also, welcome to
This
Rise
feels
City
great.
Church, man.
I do have a question. Is that a new guitar in the background of
It is.
I couldn't help but notice.
It's a Gibson that is Ben's, and
Okay.
Jean cried when he had to take his Martin down, but there's a debate that's going between Gibson and Martin. You can let Ben and Jean know, but yeah. Thanks for adding
You
that
can
to the
comment
podcast.
below.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew it. But seriously, I'm honored to be here. I'm excited. I was telling Pete, this is it. Like I feel like
You've
this is my
arrived.
peak.
You've peaked.
I'm about to plateau
You're on the
for
podcast.
a week or two, and then it's all downhill from here. So I'm looking forward to
man.
it.
Well, I'm going to start with an easy question. We'll do softball questions. You like softball,
Great.
right?
Oh, yeah.
you
Slow
like that?
pitch. Slow
Okay.
pitch.
Okay. So, new youth pastor, been doing youth ministry for a few years now. Man, what are some of your absolute favorite things about being a youth pastor?
Ooh, that's great. I mean, the list is long. It goes on and on, honestly. But I would say one of my favorite things is I was around a youth pastor in my kind of beginning stages of following Jesus, who was very, very good at teaching, and not a knock to him, but just relationships were not like his go-to thing, like as far as prioritizing and personally knowing people. But that's how I am naturally. Like I'd much rather us spend time together than me have to teach you, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And so my favorite thing, number one, is actually spending time with students.
Awesome.
And it's also so cool because they're so interesting. And even though at times I'm like, man, I remember high school like it was yesterday, I feel like I still understand it all. You hang around them for 20 minutes and you're like, man, it's actually way different than it was when I was in high school.
Which wasn't
even if it feels
very
similar.
long ago.
No, 2017 is when I graduated.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
things have changed a lot since then.
yeah, like crazy. Okay. It's crazy. So that's one of my favorite things, is spending time with students. And then the other thing is directly tied to their spiritual growth. So I remember just nothing prepared me for what it would actually be like to see students grow in their relationship with Jesus until I saw it. I said Saul. There's not an L in that word. But until I actually saw it, it was like nothing could prepare me for it. So it was pretty cool. But those are probably my top two things, if I could go on and on, like I said, though.
Cool. What are some things that you're seeing currently in the next generation, and when I say that, I'm referring particularly middle school and high school, that really excite you about this group, especially in terms of kingdom impact?
Yeah.
And then also maybe what are some things that are deeply concerning to you when you look at the next generation?
Yeah. Great. Again, great questions.
Hey,
Not
man,
as
that's
much
what
of
I
a
do.
softball. That was
We're going to move from softball.
Yeah,
I'm going to start throwing some 98 mile per hour heaters in a minute,
I know,
so
right?
be ready.
yeah, I mean, great questions. Well, I'd say one of the most exciting things, I talked about it a little bit in the video on Sunday, but students really are hungry. I almost said kids, but kids too, but students are hungry for a relationship with God. Even if they don't know it, you can see that their curiosity is kind of always running. It really, in the world in general. So even taking God out of it, kids are curious, which could be very dangerous. But I've noticed that when I get the students into the youth room, the students who maybe have never stepped foot in church or aren't comfortable in church, or maybe labeled as outcasted to the church, those are the students who are not only are they curious and hungry, but they want to know. So it turns from a conversation to they come back the next week and they're like, hey, I was reading about it this week and I found this, and it's just been mind blowing to see. I'm like, man, you actually care about finding the answer to this, finding some truth to actually hold on to, and it's awesome to see that it's not good enough. For what they hear from their friends isn't just good enough for them to solidly believe it, and also what I say isn't good, because I think it's good to develop that critical thinking. And then as far as concerning things, I think there's a couple I could think of, but overall it just seems to be such a disconnection between our identity, or the student's identity. So I would say that like I said, it's deep, but I would say it more so, I feel like recently I've been thinking about it, and I think it lies more in people not understanding who God is, and students not understanding God's identity. And that's kind of where it starts. So I'd say identity issues are such a big thing, because I mean, you've seen it nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's just
Oh, yeah.
like, it's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So especially in the lives of teenagers, middle schoolers and high schoolers, it's like such a critical time of you're trying to figure out who you are, that you get, 40 different people saying you're this, or you can be this, or you did that once, now you're this, or blah, 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 blah. That it's like, man, no wonder there's just this
Yeah.
giant fog over who am I as a student.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most concerning.
Yeah, I think that you in your role, you're probably in the most formative identity shaping times in someone's life. No pressure. That's
right.
a
I'm
big
like,
deal.
oof.
But I mean, man, that's a huge time in someone's life to understand who they are, purpose, and all those types of things. So you grew up Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then eventually went away to Bible college, and then had a job as a youth pastor in Springfield, Missouri, before moving out here to Cali. Right.
Yeah.
So you had a little stint in the Midwest,
Yep.
and then your Bible college was kind of in the Midwest as well. What's it been like moving to California? Like culturally, like what's been what you expected? What's kind of taking you by surprise?
Yeah, that's a great question. It honestly, I feel like I don't have a kid, so I can't even speak to this, but I always hear people say, you don't know what it's like to parent till you have a kid. And I feel like it's me moving to California is similar to that, because I had all these ideas in my head of what people who have lived here before said about it, good and bad, what people I knew who lived here were saying about it, good and bad. And then just in my own, I mean, you Google California and
Yeah, you'll get a ton of things that come up on that
some
search, right?
stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I had thought that I had kind of bridged myself from Springfield, Missouri to San Diego, California in my head. And then I got here, and probably 2 days in, I was like, this is not at all what I
Not
expected.
in Kansas anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Literally,
Yeah.
right. Not in Missouri anymore. And so it was just, I'd say
So
that
what was different? Like what made you say that? Like
people are, this isn't, I don't want to put everyone in a box,
Sure.
but in general, people are,
well,
I feel
Mariah does that with the Enneagram.
Yeah.
So we'll let her do
Yeah,
that.
you're right.
Okay.
3 specifically. No, but people, it just seems like people are way less social. It wasn't very welcoming, to be honest. Like the people I was around that I guess knew that they were going to see me more often were more welcoming. But even then, there's like, it doesn't feel like there's this sense of like, we're so happy you're here, like overall, which again, it didn't make me sad or anything, but I was just expecting, I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm moving to like the Mecca. Like this is the promised land. Like you got the beach, you can drive 2 hours and snowboard. You got hiking every
everybody's gonna
day,
be happy
perfect
all the
weather.
time and-
I was
okay.
like, why would it? And then I get here and everyone complains.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you live in Springfield for 2 weeks and I promise you're not going to feel like this. And so, I mean that, and then there's like, it is, I will say like, so I didn't grow up in church, but I'm used to being around people who are not church or like not de-church, but never been reached, never set foot. That's what I'm used to more than anything. But these last few years, I think I haven't realized how surrounded I've been with like church people. Yeah.
Okay.
And like in the Midwest, everyone identifies with the church. So they've either been to a church and have like what they'd label church hurt, or they've been to 40 churches and they're trying to find their home, or they went to church growing up. And out here, it's like the majority of the people I've encountered are like, church, like not only does it seem like they don't have a history with it, but they're just not interested. So it's a very like as a pastor, that's something you have to navigate, especially when it's like, when there is no curiosity about it. It's like, how do I bring this up? So those are just
I remember the part of the normal conversations in the Midwest are like people just asking, "Oh, you going to church this weekend?" Like that's not a part of normal
such
conversations.
a common thing.
Yeah,
and out here, it's not at all. Like everyone, like the majority of the people I was meeting, I mean, the life. Like the heartbeat of San Diego when I first moved here is they were like, everyone's like, you got to go to Gas Lamp, I think it's called, on Saturday nights. You get blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, Saturday nights I do nothing. I'm like, I got my big day Sunday. Like that's game day.
Yeah.
And everyone's just like, what? Well, you could go. And I'm just like, that's so weird to me. And this is same topic, but different note. They play like sports on Sundays and stuff here. Even in New Mexico, I didn't grow up as a Christian.
You talking about like youth sports? And all that
like
kind of stuff?
Sundays were sacred day. Like not even if you didn't attend church, like stuff just didn't happen on Sundays. So really everything is completely different than I had
there's a big learning
expected and
curve for you
prepared for.
then.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's a lot. And I'd say I'm about 30% through that learning.
Okay.
So.
I remember when Jamie and I moved out here 10 years ago, like our biggest thing that we noticed,
Yeah.
and it's positive and negatives to it. But like in the Midwest, because there is that kind of Christian culture, everybody kind of presents themselves that way.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get underneath the surface and for people to be vulnerable and real about the things that they're dealing with.
Oh.
When you get out here, there's not that veneer. Everyone's just like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And they quickly are very open and vulnerable, which is really good. But there's no consciousness about like what's right or wrong. Just kind of like, you do you, whatever you want, and all that kind of stuff.
I was just talking to someone about this the other day, but I get exactly what you say. Like, it feels like people are more like vulnerable initially, but it's like not in the sense of like, here's what I'm walking through, or here's where I'm like, here's the areas I struggle. Like, they just put it all on the table, and it's kind of just like they're content with that. Like, it's like, and that's me. And I'm like, is that who you want to be? He's like, are you sure that's the healthiest of you?
Yeah,
so
that's true.
It's super interesting.
So, kind of piggybacking off the kind of the notion of vulnerability, shared a video yesterday of your story.
Yep.
And I mean, a lot of raw elements in that. Yeah. In particular, essentially, it's the story of a drug dealer who becomes a youth pastor. Is that a fair?
Yeah,
it's okay.
You could sum it up as that.
I mean, that's what my son took from it. So my 9-year-old, who I think immediately came up to you after, he's like, Anthony, did you really sell him do drugs? You know, and it's just kind of like,
and I said yes, and then he goes, "You were a drug dealer?"
Yeah. So that was our dinner conversation last night.
Sorry
Dad,
about
you hired
that.
a drug dealer. Awesome. But I am curious, like, because it's an incredible story of transformation of how God met you and transformed you, and a radical work in the last 5 years. I'm curious as a youth pastor, because 5 years isn't a long time, but how do you both use the story that you have, what God's brought you through to minister to teenagers, but at the same time be cautious not to like have them look at you and be like, oh, well, Anthony did that. Yeah. And it turned out okay for him, and not really advocate some of the things that were a part of your past, but to use them to help encourage others.
Yeah. Oh man, that's one of the things that even in my own personal life, I had to kind of walk through, because to be honest, when I first accepted Jesus, and my life was like I talked about, I mean, it was like a 3-week turnover from I felt like I experienced God for the first time, accepted Jesus, 3 weeks later went to Bible college. So my life was like radically changed immediately. Yeah. And I felt so ashamed about like my story and my origin and who I was and like the life I lived before. And I could go into further detail on that. A lot of it was the way that I felt like Christian classmates of mine in college treated me because they knew I didn't grow up in church. So when I stepped in as a youth pastor, I really had to wrestle with myself. Like, I know that like my story's powerful and God has brought me through, I mean, so much. And then it was really like, what's that line between communicating this in a confident way, saying like, this is where I was, here's why here's why the place I was at was not okay. Yeah. And here's how God brought me to where I am now. And it was like, honestly, even when I started at my last church, my first role as a youth pastor, it was like my full story, full testimony was probably 2-3 month process for me to like wrestle with myself to finally get to a spot where I was comfortable with sharing, because I understand exactly what you're saying. And that's what I was so worried of, is like, I don't want to scare people away. Yeah. Like I said, it was coming from an area where there's tons of people who are church. So the majority of the pastors they had are like pastors' kids or have been in ministry forever. And now they have a guy who's like, this is my first ministry job, and I used to do cocaine. So it's like,
we didn't say the drug choice. Okay, so coke is the okay. Keep going.
And so, but
You're
it's a real
California
thing,
man. Just lay it out there now. Like,
that's who I am. Just who I was. And so, like, that's something I really wanted to make sure I had right and worked through fully in my own personal life. Before I ever communicated it, because I don't ever want kids to, like you said, to look at it and see it from like a side of validation, like, oh, it's okay for me to be content with doing wrong, or be content with knowing that I'm not in the spot where God would want me to be, because eventually I will be there. Because that's just, I mean, you're just going to waste a lot of time doing that.
Well, I think truthfully, radical stories are outliers more than the norm.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm curious, like, so you had this radical moment of transformation. Yeah. But over the last 5-6 years, like, I mean, has there been moments that your past has crept back in and like, and just been like, it's just hard to kind of deal with, or things that you're like still working through of regret, or any of that, or even an addiction for that matter. Like, I mean, what's that been like? Because I think sometimes you can hear like, oh, it was a radical transformation and everything, then all of a sudden just 180 and things are great. But I'm sure that's not the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably sum that up into like 3 point. I'm the youth pastor, so I got to do 3-point system or something.
But got to stay with the same first letter. First
exactly.
Point.
Alliteration.
Alliteration there. Okay.
No, but true story. Like it really was difficult. Like when I say radical, I don't mean like immediately every single issue I have was 180'd into I'm living this perfect life. What I mean is just to go from what like I felt like I had never believed in God, experienced God, to then in that moment when I closed my eyes during that worship set to be like overwhelmed with love. And like I said, that is what I mean by radical, is how the power of that moment. And so the process afterwards was very difficult. And I preached about this yesterday in youth, but there's a big difference between accepting Jesus as your Savior and accepting Jesus as your Lord, and living a life after Him, right? And so for me, that was, I mean, there was immediate hurdles. The first thing, I wanted to take everyone with me. I was like in the Ricky Bobby phase of being saved. I was just like, I want to tell everyone, I was like, I'm on fire. Like, I just run around like I wanted to bring everybody with me. So I mean, that was the first hurdle I had, was understanding that I wasn't everyone else's Savior, because I got back and I mean, everyone in my life, even my family, was kind of just like, what happened? Like they were either,
I think it's more of a
completely,
phase
they were either not like completely unsupportive and aggressive towards it being weird, or even if you like loved me and were super close with me, they were confused because they're just like, here's this kid who's now completely different. Over, like he was gone a week at this camp and now he's a completely different kid. And on top of that, I was so excited. Like I was literally telling everyone, I was just like, hey, have you heard about God? You know what Jesus did? He gave his life for you. And like, just so excited, like not even understanding that people couldn't like comprehend what I was saying. They were in the same spot as I was a week before. So that was a big hurdle, is understanding I couldn't bring everyone with me. The second thing is, I also mentioned in that video, but addiction for sure was like, when you're in it and you're not aware, it's like I didn't live with like conviction, to be honest. So I would feel like what I was doing didn't feel wrong. Maybe at times I would question and have a thought of, what if I lived like blank, or what if I wasn't doing blank, but never once was it, oh, how I'm living is like inherently wrong. Just because it was what I knew. It was, I mean, it was years and years of my life. And so that was a big thing, is pinpointing what am I doing that's not biblical. And then it was like, how do I fix that? And that's where I really started to see, oh man, this is why they call it addiction. Like this is something that is not, I just stopped, just like it right cold away. Turkey. Like it. So there was a process that went with that. And I'm blessed with the college I was at. There was a lot of leaders who took me in and helped me with that process. Awesome. And then the final thing is, I would say, kind of ties into the first point, but looking back, like a lot of friends that I had that I was super close with, and like how I used to live and stuff like that, I try to stay in touch and not cut them out completely. And I've lost a lot of those friends over the years just through the lifestyle that we were all living. And so that's probably, I would say, the most impactful thing. And even to this day, it's like, I mean, it's just so difficult for me to wrap my head around, like, one, I could have been there because I was doing all that same stuff. And two, I played a part in where they're at, is something I've had to wrestle through. Like I was giving them a thumbs up on all of it and encouraging them to do more of it. So that's always a difficult thing to work through, but those are the real things.
Do you currently, just curious, I mean, you have a kind of a support system that is around you that's there that can keep, I mean, one, you're still 23, 24?
Yeah, 23.
Yeah. So I mean, there's the youthfulness of that age, but also like the past that you've had, like, are there's just some accountability and things that you've placed around yourself just to help you keep growing? Yeah.
So I have a solid group of people that are around me, and it's, again, it all starts from, I mean, I was just blessed immediately. And thankfully, I know I mentioned earlier that I felt like some of the Christian classmates of mine like pushed me into a corner and stuff, but there was even blessing in that, because it really helped me put my head down and grind and focus on, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn things. And so I learned about mentorship pretty early on in college. They talked about it right away. It was just part of their program. So I have 2 or 3 leaders from college that are still in my life longtime pastors, both of them, who are able to check me a lot spiritually. And then I have an uncle in ministry as well, who's like just a phenomenal leader. And on top of that, he's family. Yeah. So when you combine both of those, like I already trusted him and liked him, but then he's a solid leader. Awesome. So he's able to help. So I definitely got a good group of people around me.
And you got new people here too.
Yeah.
Here
awesome.
on the staff. Yeah, we're excited to have you here.
Don't even get me started. This staff is incredible, man. It's awesome.
I like it.
Except the guitar. I don't really. The guitar is the one.
So I talked about yesterday. This kind of used the imagery of a fog that's been hanging over us, and I said both a fog for adults, but also the next generation. And one of the things that really displays this fog over the next gen is, over the last 2 to 4 years, there has been this hockey stick increase in anxiety, depression, and even teen suicide rates.
Yeah.
And some research has recently come out that they've been trying to study, like what are some of the factors that have led to this hockey stick? Man, it's alarming. And there are 3 things that are, at least that it's not saying this is the end all of what has caused this, but these are 3 contributing factors. And so I want to give those 3 factors, and I want to just spend the last couple minutes with this, just talking about those, and maybe you adding just some thoughts. You're around students, you see these things, how they play out, and just maybe giving a little bit more understanding of how these impact the life of teenagers. So these 3 contributing factors are: 1, adolescent device addiction. And what's wrapped into that is social media consumption. So there's the adolescent device addiction. The second is adult or parental device addiction in the home. And then the third is unstable family environments, to which you mentioned, I think you 2 years old, your parents got divorced. And so there's a lot of co-parenting situations. But let's start with, like, why is adolescent device addiction, social media, why does that bring about anxiety, depression, and these things that they say may be caused from that?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the, I know I'm young, but I'm old enough to remember when I had like a Sidekick phone that was slide open, and like I remember what it was. It was crazy for people to get a touchscreen phone. So I kind of feel like this is such an interesting thing for me to even think about, because I can see where it started, and I can see how it's even rooted in my life. And so I would say, I'm not shocked that's number 1, because cell phones, like, while they're useful in many ways, they're a million times more harmful and difficult and misleading, because this whole sense of the algorithm, I'm sure you've heard about, like, algorithms. That's not just like one app. Like, the majority of people are like, oh, TikTok is, they're going to take what you like one video and blah, 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 blah. But like, that's what every single thing on your phone is doing. Yeah. And so as humans, we fall short. We have moments, whatever, who knows? Even if you make an accident, your phone is catered towards paying attention and designing everything to exactly what you do every single time you touch your phone. And so it's like, it's going to feed on those, everything that you're consuming is going to just be multiplied and immediately thrown back in your face. And when it comes to students, it's like, what are students hearing? What are students around? Because at the end of the day, that's probably what they're curious about. So even if they hear something that is not relevant to their life and they're like, oh, I'm going to Google what is blah, 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 your phone's going to pick that up. Next thing you know, you're getting an ad for blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, you're getting a recommended YouTube video to watch this guy who delivers content about blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so it's like, it really is like, all it takes is one move for every single thing you're seeing to be catered towards that one agenda. And that's what's so dangerous about it with students, is it's like, they're curious, right? Yeah. The same way that I believe that they're curious about who God is and what it's like to have a relationship with God, they're even more curious about what it is that they're being taught, or what it is that their friends in their friend group are talking about. And that's just a dangerous game when you live in a place where the majority of the people are not Christian and do not live, biblically based lives.
So in that regard, in terms of anxiety, depression, suicide, like, how would, I know you're not like a psychologist or psychiatrist, but how would those somehow correlate to social media?
Yeah. Oh, easily, like, filters it's crazy what what filters do. Like essentially you're looking at somebody's best day, best moment of the day.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's probably not even the best part of their day. It's just a picture that they think is cute or cool. And they throw all this stuff on and slap it up and make it look like you have no flaws, and then they post that, and then it's like it takes comparison, like the root of comparison immediately. You're like, I'll never live up to that, and you're like, they don't even live up to that. Like that's not even really how they look or what they're doing, and it creates this anxiety in you to be like, well, how can I live to be able to get into the position they're at and be able to post a picture like that, or anything like that. And then as far as depression, I mean, that's the heaviest one. We were meant to do life together. We were meant to have community with actual people. And it's just so much easier, to be honest. It's just so much easier to be in a group chat with 15 people than to get a group of 15 people actually together now. And as sad as it is to say, it removes a big chunk of the relationship. Like quality time, I know Mariah's probably big on love languages too, but like quality time, that being a love language, yes, some people might prefer it more than other people, but the truth is every single person needs quality time. A healthy relationship needs quality time. Like you need to spend time with each other physically. Yeah. And what's weird about it, social media, and where it creates that gap leaves room for depression and anxiety, and could lead to suicide and stuff like that. Thoughts of suicide, is that it's essentially you can be engaged with people without ever being around people. Yeah. And that's such a dangerous thing, because like proximity is so important.
Well, what you mentioned too, when you said everything on your phone really is aligned by algorithms, you start searching for depression, anxiety, suicide. Yeah. And you'll get some sites that will like speak positively in terms of getting over it, but there's reinforcement that comes and constantly just putting you kind of down that rabbit hole, which is really scary to think about.
It's also interesting to think that something I've thought about recently, but culture has kind of taken like a sad turn where it's almost cool to be sad. It's almost cool to go through things. Yeah. And I think that comes back to where we're talking about how I feel like I meet people who are like, here's what I'm going through, but they're just content with it. And it's almost like you're considered there's something weird in your life if you're not going through something, or you don't have a big trauma, like a big moment that's caused trauma. And so so many people might take that culturally, the trend of it culturally, and start to explore it. And then, like you said, next thing you know, their whole feed is blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then it's like, how can you not think or believe these things about yourself when it's all you're seeing and receiving?
Yeah. Yeah. And that second factor of, it's not just the teens, it's also the adults and parents. And I think that was one that struck me, just because part of the survey for the research was they took a survey of a ton of kids, and they said, what's one thing you wish you could change about your parents? And the number one answer by far was, I wish they would spend less time on their phones and more time talking to me. And they're talking about how in teenagers' lives, there's like this independence that they want. And at times they kind of push away, but at the same time, they're also wanting affirmed and validated, have security. But now parents have their eyes down so much that they miss the cues. And so it just reinforces things that in the teenager's life, because we're not able to pay attention, because we're fixated on our own devices as well. And so it's not just the student's fault. It's we all got to work on it, because
that's so true.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with the parents. And that's not me, as like, I never want to be, as a youth pastor, I never want to say like, it's your fault as a parent. And I would never say that directly, but I will say you are still the most impactful people in your kid's life as a parent. Everything you do, literally everything, more so than me as a pastor or you as the lead pastor of the church. Parents are always going to have the most influence in their life. And even alone on the, like, if you just base it off the fact alone that your parent, like you as a parent, are spending time on your phone, your kid's watching and observing that forever. Yeah. And I mean, it's just crazy to think that the majority of the things that as parents, you might look at and see in your kids that you're like, I don't know why they do that, or I'm not sure I like they do that. Probably started because of something you did or didn't do, or a cue that you missed.
Yeah. And the irony of this is right now we're filming a podcast, which people are going to watch or listen to on their phone. And so like, there's like, it's the world we live in, but we still have to like figure out how to navigate it and have boundaries.
So true.
One other question with this particular topic, and then we'll finish up. The other one was unstable family environments. And it is a big one, I guess, as a youth pastor, but also someone who your parents were divorced at a young age. There's a lot of people still trying to navigate through kind of co-parenting situations. anything you would say from your own personal experience to encourage parents out there, particularly those maybe in the co-parenting dynamic of how to still engage in the life of their teenager?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I know how difficult that can be. And so I'm, as a youth ministry, as a church, I'm sure you'd back this, but we want to be like, we're for you. We want to help it in any way we can. So I'd always tell people that. But the other thing is I think that where I saw a lot of divide, and this is not me throwing my parents under the bus, but is like my mom and my dad are two totally different people, like almost polar opposites. And so the way they parent is naturally completely different. My mom was always the more like, I love you, so I don't like, I'm going to kind of protect you from this type of thing, where my dad was very much the, I love you, so I'm going to give you free range to kind of do whatever, and you'll learn from that. And where I see both sides of those have benefits and both sides of those affected me, there has to be some sort of like, assuming both parents are in the student's life, there has to be some sort of like baseline, here's what we're going to, teach our kid. As difficult as that may be, just because if your kids for me, the most difficult thing, and I'm kind of stumbling over my words here, let me just regather. But the most difficult thing was being taught two totally different sets of values at two totally different houses. Yeah. Not to say one was right or wrong, but to just more emphasis on completely different areas of life. And that was where it became hard. But the areas where I grew and it was healthy was when there was a consistent value or virtue or theme that was communicated from both sides. Yeah. And so as a parent, I would say if you can be aligned and you are divorced or split families, it's going to be more difficult, and you should recognize that, and you should take all the steps you can to get extra resources and help. But also, like, it is important for your kid that there's some sort of consistency among what's being said at both households. Yeah, it sounds like, in light of just even knowing those kind of alarming statistics, like that it's worth still fighting for, trying to figure out, even if we're separated, what are some common foundational things that we can have consistent in both households for the 100%. Betterment ultimately of our son or our daughter. Kid. It's not even about, it's not even for our relationship. Like, I'm not even saying you need to be friends with, with your ex, but you should, for your kid, you should have some sort of consistency in that. Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, that's always just going to be a more difficult situation. Yeah. But it's doable. Yeah. It's for sure doable. And I would even say that as a student, you're probably paying more attention to your parents and how they are and the things they do when they've been walked through that. Yeah. Especially if you're old enough to like walk through it with them or be coherent and process what's happening when they walk through that. It's a difficult thing. Yeah. Well, and speaking of difficult things, I mean, that's why we hired you, man. So you're to fix it all, right? That's what I'm here for. But in all sincerity, it is it's a heavy calling, but one that has great promise and potential. Definitely. And still believe deeply that the best is yet to come. And so not to write off the next generation, but to invest even more. And so to maybe finish out just this episode, I mean, people have heard just the different nuances of what teens are going through and things to be excited about, but also be concerned about. Maybe for like 1 minute, what's your pitch for those watching, listening that are part of Rise City Church? Why should they and get involved in Rise City Youth, and maybe paint a picture? What is Rise City Youth going to look like? In the coming days, months, and years? That's great. I think I'll put it even in one word. Influencers. I think about the world today. I think about culture. I think about everything. Everyone wants to be an influencer. And the beautiful thing is everyone's an influence, right? Yeah. You play a role in people's lives around you. So when I look at Rise City Youth and the future of Rise City Youth, I mean, I dream and I pray for a group of students who are not just influences within the church, but they're known as influencers outside of the church. Yeah. And when I say that, I don't mean a million views on TikTok, right? TikTok, like I'm saying, if you do that, great. But I mean, like, you point people to Jesus no matter how difficult it is, and you do that consistently. Yeah. And that's the kind of students we want to disciple and we want to produce. And I believe that that's what's going to happen. So as a leader, why wouldn't you want to be a part of that? Because there's nothing better than seeing the seeds you plant come to fruition. And there's the best place to do that is when they're in middle school and high school in the critical stages of their life when they're growing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm excited to journey with you. I'm excited for what the future holds. If you want to learn more or to say, yeah, I want to help, jump into Rise to Youth, you can email this guy, Andy, right? Anthony. You want to go? Do we do Anthony or Andy?
We're going to do Anthony at Rise City Church.
I don't know if it's shorter or not. Okay. Anthony at risecitychurch.com. And I don't know why I called you Andy right there.
It's okay. It's a cool name. I get Andrew. That's what I get when people confuse my name. They call me Andrew. So it's okay.
So Anthony at risecitychurch.com. I should know the name of my youth pastor. That's great.
It's okay.
But yeah, thanks for joining with us. A lot of exciting things to come. Make sure to check out Vision Sunday. If you didn't get a chance to watch or listen to it, to know what's coming up. And we will be back next week for another episode of Digging Deeper.